Let's talk briefly about what frame rate you should be using when you are live streaming. Now, for me, when I'm actually doing my pre-recorded material, I always record everything in 24 frames per second because for me, that's the most pleasing look. And when I'm doing my live streamings, my cameras are all set to 24 frames a second as well. But what frame rate is right for you? Should you be streaming at 24, 30, or 60 frames per second? Let's take a look at the differences. I'm going to show you 3 different sections of video that are recorded at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second, and just show you the differences, how that looks actually on camera. Now, setting your frame rate is entirely personal preference. It's completely up to you how you want your streams to look, but I just thought it'd be fun to show you the differences between 24, 30, and 60 in this particular video. So let's get on with it. All right, first up, 24 frames per second. This is the standard for film and content that you would see, documentaries, stuff like that on YouTube and so on. It's the most pleasing, natural look that you would see, similar to what we would see in real life. You're seeing some motion blur as I'm moving around. It's a natural, pleasing look. And this is typically what I would stream at anyway, and what I would record my YouTube videos on. So that's 24 frames a second. So this is 30 frames per second. You might see that it's a little bit smoother than 24. And a lot of YouTube content is shot and uploaded at this rate. You'll also see news broadcasts, and those types of TV shows are typically filmed at 30 frames per second. It's a little bit smoother. It's not as motion blur, or doesn't have as much motion blur as 24 frames per second. But again, it's a personal choice. I quite like 30 frames per second, and I have recorded some of my YouTube content which I've uploaded at 30 frames per second. But again, that's something that you can consider when you're live streaming. So this is 30 frames per second. So now this is at 60 frames per second. You might see a little crop in as I've actually moved to 60 frames per second. But the point now is that you can see it's very smooth, quite hyper realistic. A lot of soap operas and those types of things are actually shot at 60 frames per second. A lot of gaming channels on the interwebs are also streaming at 60 frames per second. And again, it's a personal choice. Some YouTubers and streamers actually film their talking headshots at 60 frames per second. For me, it's not a look that I particularly like. I'd rather have 30 or 24. But keep in mind, as you are increasing your frame rates, particularly when you're streaming, you're also got to take into consideration how much bandwidth that is now going to consume when you're sending your stream to the internet. And the more or the higher the frame rate that you have, the more bandwidth is required for when you're actually streaming. So another thing that you need to consider depending on the frame rates that you choose. But this is 60 frames per second. So it's interesting to see all 3 videos side by side. You've got 24, 30, and 60 frames per second. Personally, as I've mentioned before, 24 frames per second is my personal choice, but I still like the 30 as well. I think it's quite natural looking to an extent, but 60, not for me. I think it's a little bit too video and soap opera like. Thanks a lot for watching this video. If you are interested in video production, live streaming, and other things like that, there is more content here for you to peruse and take a look at. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.